I'm Heather Sullivan, 32, compliance officer at Meridian Financial Partners in New York City. 7 years in finance taught me one thing: integrity matters more than popularity. With my MBA and compliance certifications, I built a reputation for thoroughness that some admired and others resented. My director, Bradley Thompson, definitely fell into the latter category. I never imagined a simple digital signature would become my silent defender against his systematic credit theft. Until that investor call changed everything. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe before I reveal how one hidden watermark exposed years of workplace injustice. Meridian Financial Partners occupied 30 floors of gleaming glass in Midtown Manhattan. From the outside, it projected power and precision, managing over $40 billion in assets for clients ranging from pension funds to private billionaires. The marble lobby featured a pretentious water feature that supposedly symbolized the flow of capital according to the brochures. I always thought it looked more like money circling a drain. I joined Meridian fresh out of my MBA program, starting as a junior analyst in the compliance department. While classmates chased flashier roles in investment banking or trading, I deliberately chose compliance. My father had lost his entire retirement savings in the financial crisis when a firm misrepresented risk factors in their investment products. His devastation became my motivation. Someone needed to be the guardian of rules, the protector of investors, the person willing to say no when necessary. Over 7 years, I worked my way up from reviewing simple transactions to becoming a full compliance officer overseeing new product development and major client relationships. My daily responsibilities included analyzing investment structures for regulatory adherence, reviewing marketing materials for accuracy, and essentially being the adult in the room when dealmakers got too creative with financial instruments. The compliance department operated like an internal police force, not exactly the most popular team in a profit-driven environment. We were the ones who occasionally had to throw cold water on exciting deals or point out inconvenient regulations. But a good compliance officer finds solutions, not just problems, which was my specialty. My closest colleague was Amanda Chen, another compliance officer who specialized in international regulations. We formed a natural alliance in the sometimes hostile corporate environment. Amanda had a wicked sense of humor that helped during stressful periods, along with an encyclopedic knowledge of securities law that made her invaluable. "Heather, you need to learn when to bend," she would occasionally advise. "Not break, just bend a little." I appreciated her perspective, but some lines weren't meant to be crossed. That fundamental difference in philosophy put me directly at odds with my director, Bradley Thompson. Bradley was 55, with perfectly coiffed silver hair that matched his collection of bespoke suits. He'd come up through sales in the 80s and 90s. The era of greed is good, and it showed in his approach. While technically heading the compliance department, Bradley viewed regulations as annoying obstacles to be navigated around, rather than important protections to be upheld. His management style combined superficial charm with strategic intimidation. With clients and executives, he was all smiles and golf stories. With staff, particularly women, he could turn icily dismissive in an instant. Bradley operated like a corporate politician, carefully managing his image upward while ruling his department through fear and favoritism. Derek Miller, an ambitious young analyst, quickly became Bradley's favored protege. Derek had technical skills but flexible ethics, always eager to find the creative solution that would please Bradley. He kept mental tallies of office politics that made him simultaneously useful and dangerous. "The key to surviving Bradley is making him look good," Derek once confided during a happy hour. "He rewards loyalty above everything." I nodded politely, but couldn't bring myself to play that game. My job wasn't to make Bradley look good. It was to keep Meridian compliant with regulations designed to protect investors like my father. Stephanie Watson ran human resources with a politician's smile and an iron grip. She had joined Meridian around the same time as Bradley, and their alliance was well known. Any complaints about Bradley mysteriously disappeared into administrative black holes. She excelled at using corporate jargon to obscure simple truths, talking about synergy and alignment rather than addressing toxic behavior. Margaret Davis, Bradley's executive assistant, saw everything but said little. In her 60s and approaching retirement, Margaret had mastered the art of self-preservation in corporate politics. Her perfectly neutral expression revealed nothing, but her eyes missed nothing. She controlled Bradley's calendar, which meant she controlled access to power. My conflicts with Bradley began small but escalated quickly after my promotion to compliance officer. At first, they were theoretical disagreements about regulatory interpretations. Bradley consistently pushed for the narrowest possible reading of rules, while I advocated for more cautious approaches that would better protect both clients and the firm. "Heather, you're being excessive," became his standard response in meetings. "We need pragmatic compliance, not regulatory paranoia." These dismissals were annoying but manageable. Then came situations where Bradley began taking credit for my work. It started subtly, with small contributions to my compliance frameworks being repositioned as his initiatives in management presentations. Then entire sections of my analysis would appear in his reports without attribution. When confronted privately, he would smile thinly and say, "We're all one team here." The tensions crystallized during a department review meeting 6 months into my role as compliance officer. I had developed a comprehensive new approach to documenting disclosure requirements that streamlined our process while improving regulatory coverage. I'm particularly proud of the new disclosure matrix. Bradley developed. Our CEO, James Harrison, commented during the meeting, "Excellent work." Bradley nodded appreciatively, not bothering to correct the misattribution. I sat frozen, watching my 3 months of late nights being credited to someone else. When I tried to subtly clarify later, Bradley pulled me aside. "Heather, you need to understand something fundamental about corporate success," he said in a patronizing tone. "The work product of this department belongs to its leadership. Your contributions are valued, but they roll up under my direction. That's how corporate America works." It wasn't how it was supposed to work, and it certainly wasn't how I intended to work. But for the moment, I swallowed my frustration and focused on doing my job with integrity, even as Bradley's behavior worsened. The breaking point was approaching, though neither of us knew it yet. It would arrive in the form of Kingston Capital, a potential client whose $500 million investment would transform Meridian's fiscal year from good to exceptional. And with that deal, the stage was set for a conflict that would expose the fault lines in our professional relationship. Kingston Capital's interest in Meridian came during the fourth quarter, when performance bonuses hung in the balance. The executive team made it clear landing Kingston would mean substantial rewards for everyone involved. Bradley called an all-hands department meeting to emphasize the importance of the deal. "I cannot overstate how crucial this client is to our annual targets," he announced, pacing energetically at the front of the conference room. "Kingston has a reputation for thorough due diligence, but also for moving quickly once decisions are made. Our job is to facilitate, not obstruct." His gaze lingered meaningfully on me during those last words. The message was clear: compliance concerns should not derail this opportunity. The proposed investment structure was complex, involving multiple tiers of asset-backed securities with varying risk profiles. Kingston would receive projected returns of 12 to 15% annually, significantly above market rates for similar investments. Those numbers immediately triggered my compliance radar. Over the next week, I methodically analyzed the offering materials, comparing projected returns against historical performance data. The discrepancies were concerning. The marketing materials highlighted peak performance periods while minimizing downturn risks. The fee structure included multiple layers that weren't clearly disclosed in the summary documents. Most troublingly, the risk factors section omitted several material considerations that regulations explicitly required. I compiled my findings into a detailed report with specific recommendations to bring the offering into compliance. Rather than sending it broadly, I scheduled a private meeting with Bradley, first hoping to address the issues constructively. Bradley's corner office featured floor-to-ceiling windows with views of Central Park. Power was displayed through real estate at Meridian, and his space announced his position in the hierarchy. I arrived with my laptop and supporting documentation, prepared for a professional discussion. "Heather, what's so urgent?" Bradley barely looked up from his computer. "I've completed my compliance review of the Kingston offering." I began opening my laptop. "There are several issues we need to address before proceeding." Bradley's expression hardened. "Issues? What kind of issues?" I walked through my findings methodically: the misleading performance projections, insufficient risk disclosures, and problematic fee structure. As I spoke, Bradley's posture became increasingly rigid. "This is precisely why deals die, Heather," he interrupted, his voice cold. "Theoretical compliance concerns that ignore business realities." "These aren't theoretical, Bradley. They're specific regulatory requirements. If we present this offering as currently structured, we're potentially violating multiple SEC regulations. Bradley stood abruptly, looming over the desk. Your job is to find ways to make this work, not reasons it can't. Actually, my job is to ensure we operate within regulatory guidelines, I replied, maintaining my composure despite my racing heart. I've outlined a compromise approach that would address these issues while still presenting an attractive offering. I showed him my proposed revisions, more balanced performance projections, enhanced risk disclosures, and a simplified fee structure that maintained profitability while improving transparency. Bradley scanned the document, his jaw working silently. Finally, he sighed dramatically. Fine, make your changes, but this better not scare off Kingston. Properly structured compliance protects everyone, I said, including Meridian. Just get it done by tomorrow, he replied dismissively, effectively ending the meeting. I spent that night refining the revised offering materials, creating a version that satisfied regulatory requirements while maintaining the investment's appeal. The work was detailed and exhausting, but I believed it served both the company's interests and my professional obligations. The following afternoon, Bradley called a team meeting to review the Kingston proposal. Senior leadership attended, including James Harrison, our CEO, and representatives from the investment team. I arrived prepared to walk through the compliance adjustments I'd made. Bradley launched into a presentation of the offering, including all my revisions without any mention of the previous compliance issues or my work addressing them. As you'll notice, he said smoothly, I've refined the return projections to better reflect sustained performance across market cycles. I've also enhanced the disclosure framework to ensure we're exceeding regulatory requirements. James nodded approvingly. Smart approach, Bradley. Kingston will appreciate the transparency. When a junior team member asked about the fee structure changes, Bradley smiled. Good question. I restructured the fees to maintain our margins while eliminating potential disclosure complications. My stomach tightened as Bradley continued claiming sole credit for hours of my work. When the discussion turned to implementation timeline, someone asked who would handle the compliance documentation. Heather will assist with the background support, Bradley said casually. She's good with the paperwork details. Background support. Paperwork details. My comprehensive analysis and solutions reduced to clerical work. The dismissal stung sharply, but I maintained a professional demeanor throughout the meeting. Afterward, Amanda found me in my office, door closed, staring blankly at my computer screen. I saw what happened in there, she said quietly. That was your work, he presented. Every slide, every solution I confirmed, the hurt evident in my voice despite my attempt to sound detached. Amanda sat on the edge of my desk. You need to start documenting everything, Heather. Every email, every draft, every conversation. What good will that do? It's his word against mine, and he's the director. Because someday there might be a reckoning, Amanda said. And when that day comes, you'll want receipts. Her advice resonated with my compliance mindset. Evidence mattered. Documentation created accountability. That evening, I implemented a new personal protocol, comprehensive records of all my work, backed up securely with timestamps and version histories. I also added a small but significant change to my workflow. Every document I created now included a digital signature embedded in the metadata and a subtle watermark that would only appear under specific viewing conditions. It wasn't about credit or recognition, I told myself. It was about accountability. For the next 3 months, I continued producing high-quality work, while Bradley continued claiming it as his own. The Kingston deal progressed, though, with concerning signs. They requested multiple clarifications on points that had been in my original analysis but were removed in Bradley's final version. I addressed these questions directly when possible, but was increasingly sidelined from client communications. Then came the morning email from the investment committee, flagging urgent compliance concerns with the Kingston relationship. The very issues I had initially identified were creating problems now that Kingston's lawyers were conducting their due diligence. Bradley called me to his office immediately. Fix this, he demanded, forwarding the committee's email. Whatever it takes. I could have pointed out that these were precisely the concerns I'd raised months earlier, the ones he had minimized and modified. I could have noted the irony of now being asked to solve problems that wouldn't exist if my original recommendations had been followed. Instead, I simply said I'll handle it and returned to my office to implement the very solutions I had proposed in the beginning. The incident reinforced my growing realization Bradley would take credit for successes and deflect blame for failures regardless of who actually did the work. It was a pattern that would soon be tested on an even larger scale, with Blackwell Investments where the stakes would prove much higher for us both. The Kingston situation stabilized after I implemented my original compliance recommendations, though the relationship remained tenuous. Bradley avoided acknowledging that the solutions were identical to my initial proposals, instead framing the adjustments as evolving the offering based on client feedback. The experience left me increasingly disillusioned but more determined than ever to maintain professional standards. 3 months after the Kingston episode, Meridian received an inquiry from Blackwell Investments, a prestigious firm managing assets for ultra-high net worth clients and institutions. Their potential investment dwarfed Kingston's approaching $1 billion. Landing Blackwell would not only transform Meridian's fiscal year, but potentially reshape the firm's standing in the industry. James Harrison personally announced the opportunity at an executive briefing. Blackwell doesn't shop around casually, he emphasized. Their interest means they see something special in our approach. This could be the defining relationship of our firm's decade. The pressure was immediate and intense. Every department was instructed to give Blackwell Materials priority attention. For compliance, this meant a comprehensive review of all offering documents, risk disclosures, and regulatory considerations. Bradley summoned me to his office the same afternoon. "Heather, you'll lead the compliance review for Blackwell," he stated his tone, making it clear this was not a request but an instruction. Their due diligence is legendarily thorough, especially their legal team. Everything must be impeccable. The assignment was both a recognition of my technical capabilities and a convenient way to assign blame if anything went wrong. "I understand the importance," I replied evenly. "When do you need my assessment?" 3 weeks, Bradley said, already turning his attention back to his computer. "Complete analysis, all potential issues, identified with solutions provided." The timeline was aggressive, given the complexity of the proposed investment structures. I would need to examine multiple product offerings, each with distinct regulatory considerations across different jurisdictions. "I'll need additional resources," I noted. "This scope typically requires at least 6 weeks." Bradley looked up sharply. 3 weeks, Heather. Make it happen." The next 21 days became a blur of 18-hour workdays, takeout dinners at my desk, and minimal sleep. I recruited Amanda to help with international regulatory considerations, and even pulled in Derek for quantitative analysis support. My apartment became a theoretical concept, something I vaguely remembered visiting occasionally for fresh clothes. The work was grueling but thorough. We identified numerous compliance issues requiring attention: inconsistent performance reporting, methodologies, incomplete risk factor, disclosures, problematic fee arrangements, and several potential conflicts of interest that weren't properly disclosed. None of these problems were unfixable, but all required thoughtful restructuring to meet regulatory standards. I compiled our findings into a comprehensive compliance memo that ran to 73 pages with an executive summary providing clear recommendations for each issue. The document represented the most thorough analysis I had produced at Meridian, something I took professional pride in despite the personal cost of its creation. The night before Bradley's deadline, I sent him the completed memo with a detailed email summarizing our findings and proposed solutions. His reply came minutes later. "Received. Meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. with senior leadership to review." The expanded team meeting included James Harrison, Patricia Wilson, general counsel heads of various investment divisions, and the core team working on the Blackwell relationship. The conference room was packed with Meridian's power players, all focused on securing this transformative client. Bradley began the meeting with a broad overview of the Blackwell opportunity, then turned to the compliance review. "I've conducted a thorough analysis of the offering materials," he stated, displaying my executive summary on the presentation screen with my name and title nowhere to be seen. My stomach tightened as I watched him page through my document, presenting my findings as his own work. When he reached the section on proposed solutions, he began systematically downplaying the seriousness of the compliance issues. While there are some technical considerations, he continued dismissing weeks of meticulous analysis with a wave of his hand. None represent material obstacles to proceeding. I couldn't remain silent. "Actually," I interjected professionally, "several of these issues require substantive changes to comply with SEC regulations, particularly the disclosure inconsistencies on pages 17 through 22. Bradley's expression hardened momentarily before he forced a tight smile. Heather has a particularly conservative interpretation of certain guidelines, he said dismissively. It's not an interpretation issue, I persisted. The regulations explicitly require consistent methodology when presenting historical performance data. Our current approach selectively uses different calculation methods for different time periods, which creates a materially misleading impression. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the disagreement unfolded. Bradley's jaw tightened visibly as he realized I wouldn't quietly accept his mischaracterization. Perhaps we should hear the specific concerns, James suggested, looking between us with growing confusion. I began walking through the key issues, systematically referencing specific regulations and explaining the potential consequences of non-compliance. As I spoke, I could see several executives taking notes and exchanging concerned glances. Bradley's interruption came halfway through my explanation. This is excessive nitpicking, he snapped, his professional veneer cracking. We're losing the forest for the trees here. I started to respond, but Bradley's voice rose over mine. She's just background noise in this process. The substantive compliance work has already been addressed in my summary. The phrase hung in the air. Background noise. The conference room fell silent as executives shifted uncomfortably. James Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing. Let's take a step back, Patricia Wilson said, breaking the tension. Bradley, we appreciate your overview, but these regulatory concerns sound significant. Heather, please send your complete analysis to my office directly. I'd like my team to review before we proceed further. The meeting concluded shortly after, with James instructing Bradley to work with me to address the compliance issues before proceeding with Blackwell. As people filed out, Bradley gestured for me to remain behind. When we were alone, his professional mask dropped completely. That was completely inappropriate, he hissed. You undermined me in front of the entire executive team. I was doing my job, I replied evenly, despite my racing heart. Those compliance issues are real and need to be addressed. Your job is to support this department's leadership, not contradict it, he countered. This memo is excessive and alarmist. Simplify it immediately, or I'll do it myself. I can't remove legitimate regulatory concerns just because they're inconvenient, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. That would violate my professional obligations. Bradley's expression darkened. You have until tomorrow morning to produce a streamlined version. Otherwise, I'll handle it my way. I left the conference room, shaking slightly equal parts, angry and anxious. Amanda was waiting at my office, having heard about the confrontation through the company grapevine. That took courage, she said as I closed my office door. That may have been career suicide, I replied, sinking into my chair. He's furious. So what happens now? I'm not changing that memo, I said firmly. The issues are legitimate and need to be addressed. The following morning, I checked the shared document drive and discovered Bradley had taken matters into his own hands. My original 73-page analysis had been replaced with a 15-page version that dramatically downplayed the compliance concerns. Most critically, he had removed my name entirely and listed himself as the author. I immediately took screenshots documenting the changes and downloaded copies of both versions. The evidence was clear. Bradley had substantially altered a compliance document to minimize regulatory issues, then claimed authorship himself. That night, I called Amanda to discuss my options. This goes beyond taking credit, I explained. He's actually modified substantive compliance findings. That creates real regulatory exposure. And potential legal liability, Amanda added grimly, especially if Blackwell makes investment decisions based on incomplete information. I'm considering going to Patricia Wilson directly, I said. As general counsel, she should know about this. That's nuclear, Heather. Bradley has allies throughout senior leadership. Are you sure you want to escalate this? I wasn't sure. Whistleblowing, even internally, carried significant career risks. But allowing materially misleading information to go forward created both ethical and legal concerns I couldn't ignore. During this conversation, an email arrived from the investment committee regarding Kingston Capital. They were requesting clarification on several issues that had resurfaced problems I had identified in my original analysis, but that Bradley had minimized in his version. The pattern was becoming clear. Bradley routinely downplayed compliance concerns, took credit for others' work, and deflected blame when problems inevitably surfaced. The question was how to address it without committing professional self-destruction. Maybe there's a middle path, I said finally. I'll continue documenting everything, but I'll also implement an additional safeguard. That night, I created an enhanced digital signature system for all my compliance documents, one that included invisible watermarks that would only appear under specific viewing conditions, along with embedded metadata that would clearly identify original authorship. The solution wasn't about recognition or credit, it was about accountability and ensuring that critical compliance information couldn't be misrepresented without evidence. Little did I know that this small technical precaution would soon become the pivotal element in a career-defining confrontation. 2 weeks after Bradley altered my compliance memo, Blackwell Investments scheduled a video conference to discuss their potential investment. The meeting would include their most senior executives conducting final due diligence before making their decision. Everyone at Meridian understood the stakes this single client relationship could transform the firm's market position and financial trajectory. The morning of the call, Bradley summoned me to his office. "You'll sit in on the Blackwell call this afternoon," he instructed without looking up from his computer. "Of course," I replied. "Would you like me to prepare any specific materials for compliance questions?" Bradley's gaze flicked up briefly. "That won't be necessary. I'll handle all substantive responses. You're there as a resource if technical details arise, but otherwise stay quiet." The instruction was clear: be present, but invisible. Background noise, as he had so memorably put it. I spent the morning reviewing the altered compliance memo again, along with the original version I had preserved. The differences were stark and concerning. Multiple significant regulatory issues had been downplayed or removed entirely. If Blackwell based their investment decision on this modified information, there could be serious repercussions down the line. The video conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock in our largest meeting room. James Harrison would lead for Meridian with Bradley, handling the compliance and regulatory portions. Several department heads would address specific aspects of the investment opportunity. My role, as defined by Bradley, was to observe silently from the back of the room. I arrived early, taking a seat at the far end of the conference table where I would be barely visible on camera. Bradley entered minutes later, nodding curtly in my direction before taking a position near James at the head of the table. The room gradually filled with Meridian executives, all displaying the nervous energy of performers before an important show. At precisely 2 o'clock, the video connection activated, revealing the Blackwell team in their sleek San Francisco offices. The introductions began with James Harrison presenting the Meridian leadership. "And joining us for compliance matters, Bradley Thompson," our compliance director James said, gesturing toward Bradley, who nodded confidently. Bradley didn't bother to introduce me or the other junior staff present. In the hierarchy of the meeting, we were essentially furniture. The Blackwell team included 3 key executives: Victoria Harrington, their chief investment officer, a sharp-featured woman with 20 years of industry experience and a reputation for missing nothing; Alexander Reed, legal counsel, whose background included 5 years at the SEC; and Jonathan Pierce, managing director, known for his technical expertise in structured investments. "We appreciate this opportunity," Victoria began after introductions concluded. "As you know, Blackwell conducts exhaustive due diligence before committing capital. Today's discussion will focus primarily on the compliance framework supporting your proposed investment structure." James shifted almost imperceptibly. He had clearly anticipated a broader strategic discussion rather than an immediate dive into compliance details. "Bradley Thompson will address those considerations comprehensively," he said, gesturing toward Bradley. Bradley launched into a polished overview of Meridian's compliance approach, emphasizing the firm's commitment to regulatory adherence while maintaining investment flexibility. His presentation was smooth and confident, filled with industry jargon and reassuring generalizations. Victoria listened attentively, then began her questioning. "Let's discuss your methodology for ensuring consistent performance reporting across different market cycles," she said, referencing one of the key issues I had identified in my original memo. Bradley offered a vague response about industry standard practices and contextual reporting frameworks. Victoria pressed further. "Specifically, I'm interested in how you reconcile the varying calculation methodologies used in different sections of the offering materials. For instance, the 10-year performance uses time-weighted returns while the 3-year uses money-weighted approaches." This was precisely the issue I had flagged as potentially misleading. Bradley hesitated momentarily, then launched into an explanation that skirted the fundamental problem. Alexander Reed Blackwell's legal counsel interjected. I'm particularly interested in the compliance review process these materials underwent. Our team noticed several disclosure approaches that seemed to fall into regulatory gray areas. All our materials undergo rigorous compliance review, Bradley asserted confidently. Excellent, Jonathan Pierce said. We'd like to better understand that process. The compliance memo referenced in your documentation package provides a framework, but we have several questions about its implementation. Bradley nodded, maintaining his composed expression. I'd be happy to walk through the compliance considerations outlined in that memo, which I prepared based on our team's analysis. My heart rate accelerated. Bradley was now explicitly claiming authorship of the document he had altered and put his name on. Actually, Jonathan continued, we'd like to share the document on screen to discuss specific sections if that's acceptable. Of course, Bradley agreed, though. I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. Jonathan shared his screen, displaying my compliance memo with Bradley's name now listed as author. Section 3. Particularly interested our team, he said, scrolling to the risk disclosure portion. The approach described here seems to diverge from statements made earlier in your marketing materials. As Jonathan zoomed in on the document, something unexpected happened. The digital watermark I had embedded became visible under the specific viewing conditions created by the screen sharing software. Across the bottom of the page, faint but legible text appeared. Prepared by Heather Sullivan, Chief Compliance Officer. Victoria Harrington noticed it immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she leaned forward. Excuse me, she interrupted. There seems to be some attribution text appearing on this document. Heather Sullivan. Is that person present? The room fell silent. Bradley froze momentarily, his expression unreadable. James Harrison looked confused. Heather is our compliance officer, yes. She's joining us today. He gestured vaguely toward my end of the table. Victoria's gaze found me through the video feed. Heather Sullivan, she said with dawning recognition. We met at the Regulatory Compliance Symposium in Boston last year. You gave an excellent presentation on emerging disclosure standards. Yes, that's correct, I replied, surprised she remembered. It's nice to see you again, Miss Harrington. So this compliance memo was your work? She asked directly. The room's atmosphere shifted palpably. I could feel Bradley's glare without needing to see it. James Harrison was looking between us with growing concern. The original compliance analysis was conducted by my team, yes, I answered carefully. Jonathan, still controlling the screen share, clicked through document properties. The metadata shows original authorship by Heather Sullivan, with modifications by Bradley Thompson. He noted neutrally, though the implication was clear. Victoria's expression remained professionally composed, but her eyes conveyed understanding of the situation. Director Thompson, she said, turning her attention back to Bradley, would you mind repeating your earlier comment about background noise, now that we've identified the document's author? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin removed. Bradley's face flushed visibly as he struggled to formulate a response. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about document attribution, he managed finally. Our compliance process is collaborative. Perhaps Ms. Sullivan could address our questions about the specific compliance considerations. Alexander suggested, his tone, making it clear this wasn't really a request. James Harrison, reading the situation, quickly nodded. Heather, please join us at the front to address Blackwell's questions. I moved to the main table, maintaining professional composure, despite the tumult of emotions beneath the surface. For the next 40 minutes, I walked through the original compliance analysis, addressing each of Blackwell's questions thoroughly. Victoria asked particularly insightful questions about our methodology, while Alexander probed specific regulatory interpretations. Throughout this exchange, Bradley sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence, watching as his misrepresentation unraveled in real time. James Harrison's expression grew progressively more concerned, as the gap between Bradley's version and my original analysis became apparent. As the meeting concluded, Victoria made a pointed statement. Thank you for this clarification, Heather. For any future compliance discussions regarding our potential investment, we'd like to work directly with you as our primary contact. Of course, James agreed quickly. Heather will be your dedicated compliance liaison. After the video conference ended, the room remained silent for several long moments. James finally broke the tension. Bradley, Heather, my office. Now. As we filed out, I caught Amanda's eye across the room. Her slight nod conveyed volumes. The reckoning had arrived. Bradley stormed into James Harrison's office ahead of me, his controlled facade crumbling. This was a deliberate sabotage, he hissed, turning to face me as I entered. You engineered that entire situation. James held up his hand, his expression severe. Enough. I want to understand exactly what happened in that meeting and why our potential billion-dollar client now believes we've misrepresented our compliance process. Before either of us could respond, Patricia Wilson, our general counsel, entered the office. I just heard about the Blackwell call, she said, her normally measured voice tinged with concern. James, we need to discuss this immediately. That's precisely what we're doing, James replied, gesturing for her to join us. Bradley was just about to explain why Blackwell discovered a compliance document with altered authorship during our most important client call of the year. Bradley straightened, adjusting his suit jacket, in a gesture I recognized as his preparation for strategic manipulation. There's been an unfortunate misunderstanding about internal document protocols, he began smoothly. Heather prepared an initial draft of the compliance analysis, which I subsequently refined and finalized as department director. The watermark was an unauthorized addition that created confusion during the call. Unauthorized, I echoed, unable to contain my disbelief. Bradley, you removed my name entirely and listed yourself as the sole author after substantially altering the content. That's a serious allegation. Patricia interjected, her legal mind, immediately recognizing the implications. I have documentation, I replied evenly, pulling out my laptop. The original 73-page analysis I submitted, and the 15-page version Bradley created afterward, removing most of the substantial compliance concerns. James' expression darkened. Show me. I opened both documents side by side, displaying the dramatic differences. The original detailed numerous significant regulatory issues requiring address. Bradley's version minimized or eliminated most of these concerns. The authorship change was clearly visible, as were the modification timestamps. This goes beyond a credit dispute, Patricia said, quietly reviewing the documents. This represents a material alteration of compliance findings. Bradley's strategy shifted instantly. Heather's original analysis was excessively conservative and would have unnecessarily killed the Blackwell opportunity. As department head, I exercised appropriate judgment to present a more balanced view. By erasing critical regulatory concerns, I challenged. The issues I identified weren't minor technicalities. They were substantive problems that could expose both Meridian and Blackwell to significant regulatory risk. James rubbed his temples, the magnitude of the situation becoming clear. Bradley, did you present altered compliance findings to our largest potential client? I presented a professionally appropriate analysis, Bradley insisted. Heather's approach was alarmist and impractical. The office phone rang, interrupting the increasingly heated exchange. James answered, his expression shifting as he listened. Yes, she's here with me now. I understand. Thank you. He hung up and looked directly at me. That was my assistant. Victoria Harrington from Blackwell is asking to speak with you directly. Bradley's face flushed with anger. This is completely inappropriate. All client communications should go through proper channels. Given what I've just seen, James replied coldly. I'm no longer certain what the proper channels are in our compliance department. He turned to me. Heather, please take Victoria's call in the conference room. Patricia will join you. As Patricia and I stood to leave, James added, Bradley, you'll remain here. We have much more to discuss. In the adjacent conference room, Patricia and I connected the video call with Victoria Harrington. Her professional demeanor remained intact, but her expression was serious. Miss Sullivan, thank you for speaking with me, she began. I'll be direct. Today's meeting raised significant concerns about Meridian's compliance practices and internal protocols. I understand, I replied carefully, and I appreciate the opportunity to address those concerns. What we witnessed appears to be a material misrepresentation of compliance analysis, Victoria continued. As you can imagine, that creates serious questions about Meridian's overall approach to regulatory adherence. Patricia leaned forward. Ms. Harrington, as General Counsel, I want to assure you that what you observed today does not reflect Meridian's institutional values or standard practices. We're taking this situation extremely seriously. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. I appreciate that assurance. Here's where Blackwell stands. We remain interested in the investment opportunity, but only under specific conditions. She turned her attention directly to me. Miss Sullivan, based on your reputation and what we observed today, Blackwell would require your personal oversight of all compliance aspects of our relationship. Any materials or analysis would need your direct verification. The request was unprecedented, essentially asking for a compliance guarantee from a specific individual rather than the institution. It reflected both their serious concerns about what they had witnessed and, surprisingly, their trust in my personal integrity. Additionally, Victoria continued, we would expect a comprehensive review of the original compliance issues you identified with transparent resolution of each point before proceeding. That's entirely reasonable, I replied. I would insist on the same in your position. After the call concluded, Patricia turned to me with a measured expression. You understand the significance of what just happened. Blackwell is essentially making you personally responsible for a billion-dollar relationship. I understand. I nodded, the weight of that responsibility settling on my shoulders. Let's rejoin James, Patricia suggested. There are significant decisions to be made. When we returned to the CEO's office, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Bradley sat rigidly in his chair, while James's expression had hardened from confusion to controlled anger. Victoria Harrington has made Heather's oversight a condition of moving forward, Patricia announced. They've requested her personal verification of all compliance materials. James nodded grimly. That aligns with the conversation Bradley and I have been having. He turned to me. Heather, I owe you an apology. Bradley has admitted to modifying your compliance analysis without appropriate disclosure, though he maintains it was within his authority as department director. Bradley's expression remained stonily defiant, though he remained silent. Given the seriousness of this situation, James continued, we're initiating a formal internal investigation into this matter and any similar instances. Patricia will oversee the process. He turned to Bradley. Effective immediately, you're placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. Bradley's composure finally broke. This is absurd. I've built this department from nothing over 15 years. You're going to let one overreaching compliance officer destroy that based on a technical misunderstanding. This isn't about a technical misunderstanding, James replied firmly. This is about the integrity of our compliance function and the trust of our clients. Heather, effective immediately, you'll serve as acting compliance director until this matter is resolved. The pronouncement hung in the air. In the span of a single afternoon, the professional dynamic had completely inverted. Bradley, ashen-faced, gathered his things and left without another word, escorted by security, as per standard protocol for administrative leave. As I returned to my office afterward, colleagues watched with curious expressions, the news already spreading through office whispers and messaging channels. Amanda was waiting at my door, her expression a mixture of concern and vindication. Acting director, she said quietly. That was fast. And completely surreal, I replied, still processing the whirlwind of events. Bradley's allies are already circling the wagons, she warned. Derek's been calling emergency meetings with the junior staff. The political reality began to sink in. Bradley had built his department through years of relationship cultivation and strategic alliances. Many staff members owed their positions to his patronage and would naturally feel threatened by his sudden removal. We need to address the team, I realized, before speculation and fear take over. That evening, after most staff had departed, Amanda and I shared a celebratory but subdued dinner at a nearby restaurant. The victory felt important, but incomplete, the challenges ahead substantial. To digital signatures, Amanda toasted wryly, raising her glass. I smiled despite my exhaustion. To accountability. That night, sleep proved elusive as I contemplated the dramatic shift in circumstances. The vindication was satisfying, but tempered by awareness of the responsibility I now carried. Bradley's departure created a leadership vacuum that I would need to fill while navigating the political complexities he left behind. As I finally drifted off near dawn, one thought provided comfort: the truth had spoken when I couldn't. Sometimes the signature we leave on our work speaks louder than any defense we might offer. The 2 weeks following Bradley's administrative leave unfolded like a crash course in corporate leadership. As acting compliance director, I inherited a department in turmoil, divided between those relieved by Bradley's absence and those loyal to his regime. Derek Miller emerged as the unofficial leader of Bradley's faction, subtly undermining my temporary authority through passive resistance and back-channeling to senior management. Patricia Wilson launched a thorough investigation reviewing Bradley's conduct over the previous 3 years. Her team interviewed staff members, examined document histories, and scrutinized client communications. I cooperated fully, while simultaneously attempting to stabilize the department and maintain our essential compliance functions. The investigation quickly uncovered a pattern that extended far beyond my personal experience. Bradley had systematically claimed credit for subordinates' work, altered compliance findings to facilitate deals, and retaliated against those who challenged him. Several former employees came forward with similar stories, describing a toxic culture of fear and favoritism. Most concerning were the compliance shortcuts that had created actual regulatory exposure. Kingston Capital's ongoing issues were just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation identified multiple instances where Bradley had downplayed legitimate compliance concerns to expedite transactions. Amanda proved invaluable during this period, helping me navigate the department's complex dynamics while maintaining operational continuity. Focus on the work, she advised. Let the investigation handle Bradley. Your job is to demonstrate what competent, ethical leadership looks like. I took her advice to heart, implementing several immediate changes to department protocols. First, I established transparent attribution standards, ensuring that all work products clearly identified their actual creators. Second, I instituted collaborative review processes that maintained compliance rigor while incorporating practical business considerations. Finally, I began holding open forum discussions where team members could raise concerns without fear of retaliation. These changes initially met with skepticism, particularly from Bradley's allies. Derek maintained a barely concealed hostility, questioning decisions and subtly undermining my authority in meetings. Rather than responding defensively, I invited him to one-on-one discussions. I know you were close to Bradley, I acknowledged during our first private meeting, and I respect the technical skills that earned his trust. Derek's expression remained guarded. Bradley understood how business works. Compliance can't just be about saying no to everything. I agree completely, I replied, surprising him. Effective compliance isn't about obstruction. It's about finding compliant paths to business objectives. That's exactly the culture I'm trying to build. Over time, these individual conversations began shifting the department's dynamics. Even Bradley's most loyal supporters couldn't ignore the evidence emerging from the investigation or the improved work environment under the new approach. 3 weeks into my acting role, we faced our first major test, a follow-up call with Blackwell Investments. Victoria Harrington had requested a comprehensive review of all the compliance issues identified in my original memo with detailed resolution plans for each. I personally led the preparation, working closely with Amanda, and surprisingly Derek, whose technical expertise proved valuable, once directed toward finding solutions rather than circumventions. Together, we developed a robust compliance framework that addressed all regulatory concerns while maintaining the investment's commercial appeal. The video conference with Blackwell proceeded dramatically differently than our previous interaction. I led the Meridian team with James Harrison participating, but allowing me to direct the substantive discussion. Victoria and her team responded positively to our transparent approach and concrete solutions. This is precisely the type of thorough, thoughtful compliance work we expect from our partners, Victoria noted as the call concluded. Ms. Sullivan, your leadership has transformed our perception of Meridian's approach. After the call, James invited me to his office. Victoria called me directly afterward, he said. Blackwell is moving forward with the full investment. She specifically credited your work as the deciding factor. It was a team effort, I replied truthfully. Once people had permission to do their best work, they stepped up impressively. James nodded thoughtfully. The investigation is concluding, and the findings are unambiguous. Bradley's conduct violated multiple company policies and created significant regulatory exposure. He won't be returning to Meridian. The news wasn't surprising given what the investigation had uncovered, but it still represented a definitive end to an era in the department's history. Which brings me to my next point, James continued. The board has approved offering you the permanent compliance director position. You've demonstrated exactly the leadership qualities we need during this transition. The offer should have been a simple victory, the professional vindication I deserved after years of having my work minimized and misappropriated. Yet I found myself hesitating. I'm honored by the offer, I said carefully, but I'd like to propose some specific conditions before accepting. James raised an eyebrow, clearly not accustomed to conditional acceptances. I'm listening. First, I want to implement a formal attribution policy across the company, ensuring that work product is always credited to its actual creators. Second, I need enhanced compliance authority, including direct board reporting for significant issues rather than filtering through multiple management layers. Third, I want to restructure compensation incentives to reward collaborative success rather than individual credit taking. James considered these requests silently. These are substantial changes to how we've operated. They're necessary changes if we want to avoid another Bradley Thompson situation, I replied evenly. I've witnessed firsthand how the current structure incentivizes the wrong behaviors. After further discussion, James agreed to my conditions, though, with some modifications to implementation timelines. 1 week later, my appointment as permanent compliance director was announced company-wide. My first official act was convening a department-wide meeting to outline the new vision and expectations. The conference room was packed with expressions ranging from enthusiastic to apprehensive. Our department is undergoing a fundamental transformation, I began, not just in leadership, but in philosophy. Effective compliance isn't about being the company's obstacle course or its rubber stamp. It's about being trusted partners who help navigate regulatory complexities while supporting business objectives. I introduced the new signature policy that would ensure proper attribution for all work. Everyone's contributions will be recognized from junior analysts to senior directors. We succeed together, we fail together, and we acknowledge each other's work transparently. Over the following months, the department culture gradually shifted. The most significant validation came when Kingston Capital, which had been considering withdrawing from Meridian after their troubled experience, reached out to discuss expanding their relationship after hearing about our new approach. Your reputation is spreading through the industry, their chief investment officer told me during a lunch meeting. People are talking about Meridian's compliance turnaround. By the 6-month mark of my leadership, Meridian's compliance department had been transformed from an obstacle to be circumvented into a valued business partner. We were invited into transactions earlier, consulted on strategy more frequently, and respected for our constructive approach to regulatory challenges. Industry recognition followed. I was invited to speak at conferences about compliance best practices and transforming department culture. A prominent financial journal featured our attribution policy as an innovative approach to compliance management. The professional redemption felt complete when the same executive who had once nodded approvingly as Bradley dismissed me as background noise now sought my guidance on a complex regulatory matter. "We need your signature on this," he said without irony. "Your approval carries weight with the regulators." That signature, once erased and now sought after, had become more than just my name. It represented a standard of integrity that had transformed not just my career, but an entire organizational culture. 1 year after the infamous watermark incident, I stood at the window of the compliance director's office, now legitimately mine, reflecting on the journey. The Manhattan skyline stretched before me, a testament to ambition and perseverance, qualities I had needed in abundance during the past 12 months. The anniversary hadn't gone unnoticed. Amanda had arranged a small celebration with the core team who had supported the department's transformation. A custom cake featured an edible image of a document with a watermark, an inside joke that now brought smiles rather than tension. To signatures that speak louder than words, Amanda had toasted, raising her coffee mug in the conference room gathering. The personal healing process had been less visible than the professional turnaround, but equally significant. In the immediate aftermath of Bradley's departure, I had struggled with unexpected challenges, imposter syndrome, despite my qualifications, hypervigilance about potential sabotage, and the weight of suddenly being responsible for an LSN. Onto your department's direction. "You've earned this position," my executive coach Barbara had reminded me during our early sessions. "The question isn't whether you deserve to be here, but how you'll use the authority you now have." That framing helped shift my perspective from defensive to constructive. Instead of focusing on proving myself, I concentrated on building something valuable. The executive coaching initially suggested by Patricia Wilson proved invaluable in navigating the transition from technical expert to departmental leader. The transformation wasn't without obstacles. Several of Bradley's most loyal supporters eventually left for other opportunities, unable to adapt to the new culture of transparency and collaboration. Derek surprisingly evolved into one of the department's strongest performers, once his considerable talents were properly recognized and directed. I didn't realize how much energy I was wasting on politics, he admitted during a performance review. It's actually easier just doing good work and getting credit for it. News of Bradley periodically filtered through industry channels. He had landed at a smaller firm with less rigorous governance, where his approach initially seemed to thrive. However, 6 months later, rumors circulated about a regulatory investigation into disclosure practices at his new employer. I took no pleasure in these developments, understanding that karma operates on its own schedule without requiring my participation. My focus remained on building a department that operated with both integrity and pragmatism. We developed a mentoring program, pairing experienced compliance officers with junior staff, ensuring knowledge transfer while breaking down hierarchical barriers. The signature policy expanded beyond simple attribution to include collaborative review processes that improved work quality while distributing recognition fairly. Victoria Harrington from Blackwell became an unexpected ally in this journey. What began as a strictly professional relationship evolved into a valuable mentoring connection. With 20 years of industry experience navigating male-dominated financial environments, her guidance proved invaluable as I encountered the unique challenges of female leadership in finance. "The higher you rise, the more some will question your right to be there," she advised during one of our quarterly lunches. "Let your work answer those questions." Amanda's promotion to senior compliance officer came 6 months into my tenure recognition, long overdue for her expertise and dedication. The department's improved gender balance at senior levels didn't go unnoticed throughout Meridian, inspiring similar shifts in other divisions. The real test of our new approach came unexpectedly, when a highly profitable but problematic investment opportunity divided the executive team. The structure technically complied with regulatory requirements, but violated the spirit of consumer protection principles. Under the old regime, compliance would have been pressured to find loopholes or look away from the ethical concerns. Instead, I presented a detailed analysis to the executive committee, acknowledging the technical compliance, but outlining the reputational and long-term regulatory risks. "We can do this deal," I concluded. "But we shouldn't. And here's why." The ensuing debate was vigorous, but respectful. Ultimately, Meridian declined the opportunity, a decision that initially disappointed the sales team, but was vindicated 3 months later, when regulators announced investigations into similar structures at competitor firms. James Harrison, initially skeptical about my principled stance, eventually acknowledged its wisdom. "That could have been us in the regulatory crosshairs," he noted during a board meeting. "Sometimes the best deals are the ones we don't do." This evolution in thinking represented the true success of our departmental transformation. Compliance was no longer viewed as an obstacle to business, but as a strategic function protecting the firm's long-term interests. The signature policy that began in our department eventually became a company-wide standard, with all Meridian work products clearly attributing individual contributions. This transparency improved not just accountability, but also collaboration, as people received recognition for helping colleagues succeed. On a personal level, the journey taught me profound lessons about workplace dynamics and personal integrity. The experience of being dismissed as background noise had transformed into being recognized as an essential voice. The systematic erasure of my contributions had given way to a culture that celebrated individual excellence within collective success. Most importantly, I learned that integrity doesn't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it simply needs to leave its signature and trust that the truth will eventually speak for itself. As I complete this reflection on my journey from silenced compliance officer to department director, I'm curious about your experiences with workplace credit theft or having your voice dismissed. Have you ever had your work claimed by someone else? How did you handle it? Please share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, your signature matters even when others try to erase it. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to stand firm in your professional integrity, no matter what challenges you face.